Hello and a very warm welcome to BBC Radio 4's debate about the future of the primary school. Now, over the last couple of weeks, Radio 4 has been exploring the history of primary schools, from the dunces caps of the Victorian age right up to today's league tables and happiness lessons, via all those hippie notions of the 70s, experiments like the initial teaching alphabet. In spite of that, I did learn to read eventually, but it took quite a while. Tonight, here at the Institute of Education in London, we've got a panel of experts and a quite opinionated audience who will be looking to the future to address the question, what is the purpose of primary education and can we do it better? So the panel tonight, education journalist Mike Baker, Mick Brooks, the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers, Dr. Sheila Lawlor, who's Director of Politeia, a forum for social and economic thinking, John White, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy of Education here at the Institute of Education, and Steve Punt, the writer, comedian, actor and regular contributor to Radio 4. Mike Baker was the BBC's education correspondent. He's now an education journalist and broadcaster. And Mike, you've been looking at the history of primary schools in your recent Radio 4 series, From Abacus to Circle Time. Why is this the right time to assess how and what we teach our under-11s?
Well, a number of reasons, really, Jane. I think, first of all, in a couple of weeks' time, a 640-page document looking at the future of primary schools is going to land with a great thud on our policymakers' desks. It's coming from the Cambridge Primary Review, which has spent 3 years looking into the future of primary education and claiming it to be the most fundamental look at primary schools since the Plowden Report some 40 years ago. The big question, will be whether government will take any notice of it, because they earlier this year had their own report from Sir Jim Rose that was a sort of an official inquiry, and it had rather limited remit. But it has laid out a number of changes which will be brought into primary schools from September 2011. Already they're being worked on. And they include 6 areas of learning, which he's proposing, that information technology should be one of the 3 core subjects alongside maths and English, and that there should be lessons in well-being. So a lot of changes already in the pipeline, but I think a bigger debate coming up, and that's appropriate at the moment because, of course, we will have a general election by next May, and education bound to be one of the big issues. I mean, just to take one example, the Conservatives have said that they would get rid of the SATs, that's the tests for 11-year-olds, and instead have those tests at the beginning of secondary school. So that's quite a radical proposal. And I think also there's a number of other reasons. There's a bit of concern about standards. We've slipped recently in one of the big international surveys which show we've slipped back amongst the reading standards for 10-year-olds down to 15th place compared to other countries. And actually, perhaps more worrying than that, we seem to have got worse than we were before. Add to that, of course, the fact that the teacher unions are thinking about boycotting next year's SATs as well. There's a lot of reasons. So I think in many ways we are really looking now, I think, at the fundamentals of primary education. We are in many ways at something of a crossroads.
Things are going to change. We are, though, only talking about England, aren't we? We've got to make that clear.
We are here. The Cambridge Review relates to England. Obviously, the Department for Education relates to England. But there are very interesting changes that have been happening elsewhere. In Wales, for example, where they got rid of the tests. And many people say, well, actually, England should be following Wales. OK,
we've established we are at a crossroads. Others, I think, might say that it's rather more than that, even that it's a crisis. So let's get the views of the rest of the panel. Dr. Sheila Lawlor, Director of Politeia. This is a forum for social and economic thinking. Now, what about the health of primary schools? What do you think?
I think they're in a worrying condition. It's not clear why primary children are at school. The focus is uncertain. Teachers themselves are uncertain, and we have very high attrition rates. Teachers leaving each year.
It all sounds a bit gloomy. I've got 2 kids at a primary school in London who, maybe it says something for my parenting, but they can't wait to get there every morning. They can't be alone. Steve, that's the other parent on the panel. What do you say about that? What about your own kids' experience?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, when you first walk into primary school, when your child is sort of approaching reception, you realise how old you are. Because I looked around and I saw a very frightening notice pinned to the wall that was obviously there to impress the parents, which was a list of targets the children should achieve by the end of reception. And the first item was the list that was said that they should understand that text conveys meaning. And I thought, oh, blimey, is this what primary school is about now? But actually, once they're into it, the fact is they still do their plays at Christmas. They still don't like maths. It's the same pictures on the wall. They still fall over in the playground and cut themselves. It's not that different.
Mick Brooks, General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers. You were a head for, nearly 30 years, primary school head,
yeah.
Are we in a crisis, do you think?
No, I don't think we are. We just need to count our blessings a bit, because I think primary education is going extremely well. Even Ofsted would say that, and I think any company with just a 5% failure rate, if it's that, would be quite proud of that statistic. However, whilst primary education is going quite well, we do have some tensions. An overcrowded curriculum, a curriculum which is dominated, particularly at the top end of the primary school, by assessment. But more than anything, we have a real problem in the recruitment of head teachers in primary. And a report that we commissioned says that there are only 3 interviewable applicants per primary school. Now, that's dangerously low. The reasons behind that, people look at the bureaucracy that's been shoveled into all schools, and punitive accountability systems, where it feels like you're only as good as your last football match or the last set of sats.
OK. Well, our last panel member is John White, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy of Education here at the Institute of Education. Now, John, you've been pondering the big education questions now for 30 years or more. What have you got to say about the current situation?
I think the primary schools are moving in the right sort of direction, but perhaps not quickly enough. I mean, at the moment, they're prisoners of the national curriculum that was brought in 1988, which was based on a range of traditional subjects. It simply seems to have been written on the proverbial brown envelope without any kind of idea of what the aims of the enterprise were.
OK, let's just go to the audience. I think there's a questioner. The microphone's coming to you.
Thank you. I'd like to continue that question. And at the end of 7 years in the primary school, what do the panel think a well-rounded 11-year-old should be like?
Mick Brooks, what do you have to say to that?
I think that the primary child should look rather like Gary when they leave. Gary was a child who didn't have an awful lot going for him when he came to my school, but actually by the time he left, he got this fantastic work ethic. He loved being in school, very rarely missed a day, and enjoyed even maths. He had a love of learning. He got a pretty good grasp, better than a good grasp of basic skills. He got an inquiring mind, and I think that's just so important to instill those things into children at a young age. He was sociable, and he was very good at working with others. And I think those are, if you like, the sort of soft curriculum, and those things lead on to expertise in various subject areas. And I'd take it the other way round, actually. I think those are the key skills.
Sheila Lawlor.
I think that the 11-year-old should be educated in a range of rather essential subjects about which there never has been any mystery. Not only should they be able to read and to write and to deal with basic number, but they should have been introduced in a reasonable way to history, to geography, I would hope a foreign language, religious education, as well as some of the other subjects which are important for a rounded child: drama, music, singing, art.
John White.
Yeah, I very much agree with Mick on the sort of personal qualities which he emphasised, and I'd certainly put the emphasis there rather than immediately on a knowledge of the subjects, although that obviously must come into the picture at some point. It's not really rocket science to see that a fulfilled life has a lot to do with wholeheartedly engaging in activities of a worthwhile sort and in relationships of a worthwhile sort. And what I'd like to see is a child at the end of his or her primary school, in fact right the way through schooling, who actually wholeheartedly engages in activities and really